Good afternoon, everyone. This session is a part of the interdisciplinary webinar series in languages organized by the Research Committee, the Postgraduate and Research Department of English, and IQAC of Maharaja's College, Ernakulam. I'm your host Abhijit, Research Scholar in the Department of English, and I welcome you to this session. Our topic for the day is resistance through literature, the Tibetan way. Joining us today is Dr. Appu Jacob John, Assistant Professor, CMS College, Kottayam. A virtual yet warm welcome to you, sir. Before we delve in, here is an excerpt about the topic. Resistance through literature is an often heard term used by many scholars since the 1980s. A number of resistance movements were seen throughout the history of all freedom movements. It is interesting to note that the violent resistance movements as well as non-violent or literary means of resistance were instrumental in sending the oppressors back to their own realms. The literary resistance stand tall among these resistance as they continue to inspire the newer ones. Here, Dr. Appu is presenting the Tibetan side of literary resistance. Those who require the certificate of participation are requested to fill up the feedback form, which will be posted in the chat box towards the end of this session. Participants, please note to post only questions in the chat box. Over to you, sir.
Can I begin?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much, Abhijit and Maharaja's College. It's really a great honor and pride to be part of you in discussing my area of expertise. It's called resistance literature or resistance, literary resistance. I will better take it up in that notion. As Abhijit had rightly said that most often we find that how we have to address this question of resistance. Most often we come to understand that resistance is something that is armed and violent, but at the same time there's another subset which is non-violent, which is rather literary, and that kind of resistance is more powerful, more eventful, and more having more more level of value than the other kind of resistance. Now, basically, when you study about resistance literature, this is a kind of literature that is generally seen as a subset of literary output. That is a socio-political activity involved in a struggle against a dominant ideology. It need not say that it is always against the colonizer or something, but everywhere you can find resistance literature. Whenever you find people, it's a way by which you find you see that resistance literature is a kind of struggle. You don't accept resistance literature as such as a struggle, but to a great extent resistance literature is the struggle that is present all over the system, because you cannot say that their literature is devoid of resistance. In the early times, we said that literature, the purpose of literature is to enjoy, entertain, and other things. But when you go to the present day understandings, literature has a great role in molding the minds of the persons. So, literature and resistance too take the same role in understanding, representing, and placing the idea of resistance before persons. Now, it's a global phenomenon. It's not just limited to the specific areas. So you may call, well, then why did I take Tibet? The reason why I took Tibet as my topic was that Tibet is the very few colonies that are ever present in the world, and in many other colonies there are violent resistance. Tibet only conducts non-violent resistance. To a certain extent, people say that it's rather a bit odd that they burn themselves out to for the freedom of Tibet, or you may call it a self-immolation. And people believe that it's a kind of way. It's not. It is unethical, because taking one's life is not correct in the sense of any kind of religion. But dropping, even when we drop that out, that we have a number of methods by which Tibetan poets have emerged out and brought in poetry that are quite different from the existing set of poetic understanding. Now, when we take into discussion certain poems, I would like to present myself, my area as giving a kind of what to say, as an opening to understanding Tibetan literature also, because Tibetan literature in English is basically a resistance literature. There is maybe perhaps the older in the older days you might have seen uh, films like Yodha, which tells of the magical kingdom of the Dalai Lama or the Rinpoches or the other, and you know what not to expect there. But here it is entirely different, and the ideas are entirely different in such a way that you use language in order to represent the life in a much better manner. Now, let me just present before you a small Tibetan poem which will give an opening towards the kind of literature that we are going to discuss. Now, just give me a minute. This poem is written by Tenzin Zundu, and uh, this poem is something that drew me closer to uh, resistance literature. When I was a student, I was a researcher. I actually read this poem and was so deeply influenced by the poem that I was attracted to study this poem, this Tibetan poetry. Now, let me just present before you this poem, and then we will move on to resistance literature, and that too in the Tibetan side. The poem goes like this: From horizon, the title of the poem is Horizon. From home, you have reached the horizon here. From here to another, here you go. From there to the next, next to the next, horizon to horizon, every step is a horizon. Count the steps and keep the number. Pick the white pebbles and the funny strange leaves. Mark the curves and cliffs around, for you may need to come home again. Should I read it once again for you? Because this is a very this poet is a very important key poet who had brought resistance literature or modern English literature from Tibet out to the forefront of many of the readers and critics. So I will just take a minute once again to read this poem out to you. Horizon. From home, you have reached the horizon here. From here to another, here you go. From there to the next, next to the next, horizon to horizon, every step is a horizon. Count the steps and keep the number. Pick the white pebbles and the funny, strange leaves. Mark the curves and cliffs around, for you may need to come home again. Now, you may be thinking that what is the relevance of this poem? Basically, this poem is not having any particular relevance, but to a great extent, that this poem has a relevance. The relevance comes to you when you understand the element of resistance that is attached to it. Now, it's a uh, the basically the theories of resistance literature dates back to 1987 when Barbara Harlow brought her book called Resistance Literature. It will it will be in multi forms where humor is there, gossiping is there, bitching is there. But I will say that humor and literature are the two, or basically poetry, are the two important forms on which this thing is, or resistance literature is being built. Now, where did resistance literature originate? You cannot say that it originated in one particular place. Maybe a number of points can be given, maybe a number of instances can be given about the origin of this resistance literature. Maybe hundreds of tools can be given in order to tell you that where resistance literature began. There are a number of literary works which show us the resistance, and You may call them as more than I will love to use the term resilience than resistance when we discuss about literature, because it's a kind of resilience, it's a kind of building up, it's a kind of thinking over, and it's a kind of going across the borders and reinterpreting, living in such a way that you bring out a world that is entirely different from the existing system. Now, it is more prominent in Europe than with the Asian side, and maybe because of the Reformation movements and because of the civil wars, you may consider that that is the reason why this kind of movements were more prominent in Europe. Because the civil wars, you know that civil wars were fought in order to in order because when most of Europe, that the latter civil wars or pre post the post Reformation civil wars were basically were for were based on ideologies, and the post Reformation wars were basically based on individual concerns. Say, for example, you have the succession wars, lineage wars. So it cannot be said that. But post Reformation, you have a number of wars. Like you will not call it as a civil war or anything. You call it as a kind of revolution. Like, for example, you have the French Revolution, American War. All this happened because of a change of understanding, change of sensibility comes in, and this also has its roots in the Reformation process, because Reformation is the basically the first anti papal or anti authoritarian movement that had turned the ideas of the whole world. So that gave rise to a new movement, which in turn presented a world which is far different from the existing world of today. Then, as we all know that post Reformation, you have Luther nailing the 41 theses on the door of the Württemberg Cathedral. You can say that it is one of the best examples of how the world represented the ideas of resistance to the outside world. Basically, it was against the papal authority, but later the other works, like during the civil wars, the other attack was against many ideologies. You have, for example, you have the communist movement and many of the socialist movements of Europe. Say, for example, French Revolution that gave rise to a number of resistance works were there. For example, you have the essays of Voltaire, Montaigne, and others who were instrumental in bringing the revolution there. Next, what about Africa or Asia? In Africa and Asia, basically, resistance literature was in the form of freedom movements, and the to check or to discuss them most, you have basically you have the African writers like Chinua Achebe, Gogai Wathiongo, and other writers who had brought in works like Wathiongo have brought in works like Decolonizing the Mind. Franz Fanon, who has brought in other works like that. So you may be confused too, and you may ask me that whether you can include such works into resistance literature. Aren't they, or should we put them inside our system also, because they are not of the canonical side. They are canonically they are considered as literary criticism or literary theories, but you can include them also into this manner. So later, when we discuss about Asia, in the case of India, that many of the several of the resistance works were in the against the Europeans. You have number of poems, you have number of literary texts that have come criticizing the European rule and European authority over the Asians. Now, moving on to the present day, what about the issues of Pakistan, Kashmir, Sri Lanka, and others? There too, they focus now on the basis of on literature, and because of literature, they are able to bring out new understandings of the world that we live around. Now, the focus nowadays changes from one foreign from the foreigner to the affluent, who have who have brought in an oppression on the people, and those who are oppressed, they bring in literature in order to resist the oppression and to do it like that. Now, if you the best examples of literature and art in resistance is that when you go to Jerusalem or Bethlehem, you will see that the cast walls of Israel being built against the ordinary citizens of Palestine. So all the Palestinian walls, the walls protecting the Israeli territories inside Palestine, are covered with graffitis from the side of the Palestinians, and they present their quest for freedom, their necessity, that says that these people are taking over their nation, their power, their homes, and taking away everything. Now, what about Tibet? Tibet is a very famous, well-known question or well-known answer that you may give for a question that which tells you that what is the which is the roof of the world. Most often, from time immemorial, that we were calling Tibet as the roof of the world, and many of us have been studying this as part of our GK classes. That saying that which is the roof of the world, that is Tibet. And Tibet, for a long time, from time immemorial, I will say that for the last 2000 years, it's a very harsh terrain which has been inhabited by people keeping a particular custom of their own. Now, these people were so powerful that there were 44 kings who had ruled over the whole system, as well as 13 monastic leaders who were called the Dalai Lamas. Not 13, actually, it is the 14th now, and they have been representing the world as the Forbidden Kingdom, because no foreigner was allowed to enter this place, so they were called the Forbidden Kingdom. Now, taking into account the Forbidden Kingdom, till the early 20th century, late 18th century, no foreigner was allowed. But 20th century witnessed a different movement, and that movement was the Chinese Revolution, whereby Mao Zedong took the authority over China, and he started developing China to such an extent that he wanted to annex Tibet, Inner Mongolia, East Turkestan, and Manchuria to the provinces of China. So this happened. The first example is that of 1959. He threw out the Tibetans out of the land and started filling in the land with the help of the prominent Han Chinese. They are now creating. They are now being a majority, and they are slowly pressing down the Tibetans back to the background. Now again, yeah, Tibet has been in freedom movement from 1959 onwards. Now 1999 onwards, there is another ethnic minority who's called Uyghurs, who form a part of the Inner Mongolia. They have started fighting against it, and nowadays, a few days back in Hindu newspaper, you found that the Uyghurs were questioning. They wanted they started an attack against the Chinese authority, Chinese hegemonic authority, and this has created a number of struggles also in this place. Now, the resistance literature is basically against control and power, as well as against the hegemonic practices. So, any kind of practice can also be a topic for discussion. Now, theories of power has developed a wide range of resistance literature. This is expressed as all kinds of art. That's a very important thing, that art, graffiti is there, humor is there. Any kind of thing can be considered as part of resistance literature. When we say this about resistance literature, the most famous picture that comes to my mind, I forgot the name of the artist. I actually found it in the shape of, in the form of a graffiti, and that graffiti shows it dates back to the dates of Vietnam War, which shows a cannon or a tank with its barrel full of sunflowers, a, a fire breathing tank with its barrel full of sunflowers. That is something extraordinary. Then again, you have at the same time, you have Picasso bringing his Guernica, almost another significant movement, and it's all a kind of representation which tells us verbal and non-verbal and expressive, and it's defiance and resistance to hegemony. So Tibet is expressive of it, and when we study Tibet, you find that Tibet has there is not much studies on Tibet, and when we discuss about Tibet, you find that Tibet is consisting of many things, and what makes Tibet as a whole is what we call as of we feeling. Usually, nationalism in the present context, we cannot say that what makes nationalism possible, because nationalism, nationality, nationhood are topics of gross discussions nowadays. But on the other side, Tibet is made up of a particular world where it discusses ideas in a much different manner. uh, Tibet is consists of 6 provinces, 6 different kinds of ethnic varieties of people are there, and they are bringing in. They are connected together. And if you study Ernest Gellner, in the very famous anthropologist and political theorist, he says that no nation is made as permanent; that every nation is changing on and on. There is this change that happens every day, and that change turns things into much different manners. So when you study it, you find that it's 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 a kind of it's a kind of world which is entirely different, which is we present a world which is much different before others. So then what makes us a nation together? You may call that what makes a nation together is none other than what we may say as basically as a we feeling. And where do we find this we feeling? Every man in this world has a we feeling. Our community, our nation, our thought, our process, our idea, and we like to delve deep into this dichotomy, whether that it's our nation, our world, our country, and those who are outside it are you and they, and we tend to avoid them also. So this nationhood we feeling is very much prominent in Tibetans also. When and in the case of resistance literature, having this nationhood more prominent is a very interesting thing also, because people with such a we feeling, they feel togetherness when they are in trouble, when they are in problem. So when we study about them, the reasons of this we feeling, we find that there are basically 4 reasons for this we feeling. The first and foremost reason is the unique religious practice of Tibet. Now, to say what's the religion of Tibet, for in a word, you may call that the religion of Tibet is none other than Buddhism. But actually, it is not Buddhism. It's a the variant of Buddhism. It's called Vajrayana. Normally, you don't find Vajrayana practiced by persons, but Tibetans are the only persons who practice Vajrayana. Now, basically, when we divide Buddhism into the various movements, you have 2 schools of Buddhism, which is called the Mahayana, which spreads from Burma to Singapore and Java, Sumatra, and to that side. Again, you have the Hinayana, which spreads from India to Sri Lanka and downwards. So Vajrayana is not such a big school. Vajrayana is a very limited school. It exists in a place called in Tibet only. And why Vajrayana? It's called Vajrayana. Now Mahayana and Hinayana and Vajrayana, the basic 3 branches of religion. In the case of Mahayana, it tells the body as the carrier, as the vehicle of the soul. And in the case of Hinayana, the soul is the greater thing and the body as meaningless. Actually, Hinayana, the word Hinayana is a negative term. It's a derogatory term, and it's actually jokingly you present the idea in such a manner that the word Hinayana signifies another thing, because Hinayana, the school of thought, actually the name of the school of thought is Theravada, and Theravada tells us theoreticians give priority to the soul than the body. So it should be Theravada, Mahayana, and Vajrayana. Now, Mahayana tells us about the greatness of the body, which is a vehicle for the soul. Now, Hinayana tells us about the soul being greater than the body. Now, what about Vajrayana? Vajrayana is all the more different from it. Vajrayana is basically it is the worship of Lord Buddha, who, holds a thunderbolt in his hand. So that is why it's called Vajra. Vajrayana is the worship of Buddha, who holds thunderbolt in his hand. So they worship the Vajradhari Buddha, and not the very peaceful Buddha whom we see in everyday life. Vajradhari Buddha. Again, taking the next example, the next idea. This kind of Buddhism is rather more militant than the others. They believe in ahimsa, but they believe in resisting the attackers also, and that too very violently. Again, they don't believe in vegetarianism, they believe in eating meat also. Maybe the requirements of the land, because of the less vegetation was there. And this religion, it is believed that there was a king called Chongchen Gampo, who is worshipped along with his two wives in the temple of Jokhang in the Lhasa city, the capital of Tibet. This Chongchen Gampo is known for marrying two princes. One is a Chinese princess and the other is a Indian princess. The Indian princess was named as Bikruti Devi, and it's believed that she is from the northeastern part of India. And the Chinese wife is named as Wenqing. Now, if you go to Jokhang Temple, you can see this king was worshipped by with along with these two wives in the temple. Now, this man was a visionary, and he called for uh, the great monastic leaders from India. And you have Guru Rinpoche, who was the most important writer or theoretician, who came from India, whose name was Padma Sambhava. Padma Sambhava came from India or Nalanda, and along with Padma Sambhava, you have Shandarakshita and Vimalasila, who came from this place, and they started teaching the ideas of Buddha to Chongchen Gampo and others. Chongchen Gampo actually accepted the religion, but he never made an attempt to erase of the ancient animistic religion. And so you have a new religion coming up, but the new religion, Buddhism, is inclusive of the older religions also. Now you have the ancient Tibetan literature or language didn't have a script. A few years later, you have another king who sent his minister Tomi Samboda to India, and from Devanagari you have the Tibetan script set up to write literature. And also, many scholars were sent from India to Tibet, and they started spreading the Buddhism to Tibet, and they started translating Indian texts to Buddhism. Even those texts we find in history, and those are not present with us, can be found in the Tibetan hands, very safe in the Tibetan Bhasha, in the language. And also the institution of the Dalai Lama. The institution of Dalai Lama was set up in the 13th century by one Dalai Lama who was a monastic leader of a group of people called the Yellow Hats. So he became the leader, and the first person started a movement. The first person died. His reincarnation was became the second person, and the third person who became the first, or he was bestowed with the title of the Dalai Lama by Altan Khan, who was the grandson of Genghis Khan, because Altan Khan was a very fierce warrior, and this monk he came there, and he converted this man from enmity to friendship, and thus he bestowed the title of Dalai Lama, or the head priest to this man. And from 13th century onwards till the 20th century, this institution of Dalai Lama had been there, and people are so influenced by the institution of Dalai Lama. I have seen people cry out, very fierce warriors. We are very fierce persons who were originally having a life in Tibet, now resettled in India. I've seen them cry before the Dalai Lama just like ordinary kids. They are weeping on and on. Now, so there is a recent movement by the Chinese government which says that they are the ones who are going to recognize the next Dalai Lama who will be born in Tibet, not in Tibet but in China. So this is a very detrimental move for the Tibetans. So they said that they are not going to accept it. Taking on cue with it, the American government said that you should give the Chinese government, the Tibetan people, the choice of selecting their Dalai Lama. But anyway, it is not going to happen. So, but they are so closely affected to the religion, the practices, and more than anything, the institution of Dalai Lama. When you go to many of the several child Tibetan homes, what we do is to present them with a photo of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So immediately the first thing what they will do is to place it like this, and by placing it like this, we may say that what happened? Have they gone mad? But for them, placing the photo of the Dalai Lama like this means that the Dalai Lama is blessing them. So very simple, but being their culture, their identity, and ethnic image. Now, the second factor that unites the Tibetan writers is the reality of exile. Why is it called a reality of exile? They have been in exile from 1959 or more than that, 1950 onwards, 70 years into exile, and no nation has understood their plight. But the people are so angry, they are so confused that they say that they want an escape from this. So this reality of exile, because of the reality of the exile, that they try to fight against the exile and they try to override the exile. But being non-violent fighters of exile, they tend to move on to poetry. Now, the third factor I will say that it is the desire to return. Now, many of the Tibetans, older generation Tibetans, still believe that they could go back to Tibet one day. And if you test or if you go through the number of Tibetan refugees in India, you can basically find three generations of Tibetans. One of the most important generation, the first generation Tibetans, were Tibetans born in Tibet, and they lived for a pretty long time in Tibet. They in their late youth or early middle age, that they were deposed to India. You have the second generation, which is born in Tibet, and as a very ordinary small kid, that they were taken to India. And a third generation, which is born in India, and they never have seen Tibet, and they have only heard of Tibet, and they dream of going back there. Now you have the fourth generation set of Tibetans who are born somewhere ever in the very many depths of the world, but they don't know where they can go back to Tibet or not. Anyway, the most important feature of all these three set of people, see, the three set of generation is that they believe one day they can go back to Tibet. Now, if you visit the older generation Tibetans in exile, they will offer you food, offer you tea, or anything like that. And at the end of this food and tea, what they will do is they will clear up the table and then wash the plates and the pots, and they will pack it up because they believe that they are going back home in the very next day. Unfortunately, this is something that is never going to happen. So this belief, this thought that which tells you that I'm going back, there's a time that I can go back, is a kind of thought on which the whole Tibetan refugee system is built upon, and also the resistance is together. There's a second generation who were born in Tibet and who have left Tibet in their infancy. They say that I have not seen Tibet completely, so I believe that I can go back very recently. These first generation and second generation Tibetans are dying out. There's a third generation, many of whom were born in the roadside camps, and they believe that will they ever go back to Tibet, which is really an impossibility for it is really a situation why people find it difficult to go outside, go back and think over. Uh, they feel that they will never go back. especially the third generation who are born in the roadside camps, in the margins, and they cannot. They dream of going back. The first poet I read to you is a person who actually is coming from the margins of the world, uh, because he was born in a roadside camp. He is about 50 years of age, and he is a person whom many of the Malayalis know very well because his poems are translated to English as well as Malayalam. And he writes prolifically in English. Every day he brings out with a poem. He reckons us with the idea of the topic of the cause of Tibet. And when I first met him, he had knee length hair, which said that he will ever cut the hair only, he will only cut the hair only, later, when many years later, when Tibet gets its independence at all. But that's still an impossibility. That still remains there. But this third generation, he was born in a roadside camp. His father was a former Naxalite, and he was killed by the Chinese. And he has not seen his father, but he really wants to go back to Tibet, and he works so hard to go back there. So this is another kind of resistance. The first generation is resisting, but this third generation who are all over the world, who doesn't have a particular identity, who doesn't have a particular place, who doesn't have a particular soul left to them. They wander around the world and they try in such a manner that they cannot go back. And this, but all of when you consider all these four generations, all these four sets of people, you will find what we call as a as as a single idea, which tells us that uh, about uh, about going back to returning back to Tibet. For them, it is almost an improbability. You are not going to go back because the Chinese authorities have taken up the control, and it's such a way that the whole terrain is changed. Now, I would like to bring in an example from a movement I studied from Palestine. In Palestine, you have a number of older generations. They keep the keys of their erstwhile homes as heirlooms. They keep the keys of their erstwhile homes as heirlooms because they were asked to move away from their household, and within a week's time, they said it was said that they can return back to their household. Unfortunately, though they moved out, they have never returned to their households, and they are forced to live in uh, several of the refugee camps in Palestine, which bans your privacy, your own space, and you live in a set with amongst a set of people who has got divergent thoughts. For resistance camps or refugee camps have been there in Palestine for the last 60 odd years. Think of it. The same is there with the Tibetan people because they too want to go back, return. That's why they are packing up their material, and that's why they are not so keen on acquiring land and vehicle and anything else. They still believe that there is a day that will come when they can go back and return to their homeland. And you have finally the last thing that I will add is that though these persons are suffering so much, you cannot say that they are struggling. They have a positive hope, and that positive hope makes us to such an extent that we are delighted because of the positive hope. And that positive hope is the thing that takes us outside, or that makes them over the top, and that brings the new idea. And because of the new idea, that people are different and they are able to understand the world in a much different way. So to sum up, these are the 4 points whereby you find the we feeling attached to them. Now, taking from cue from it, the we feeling, you have a number of features that can bring in from the Tibetan writers. Now, taking Tibetan writers as a whole, you have three distinct or more distinct generations of Tibetan writers at present. The first generation which brings out a number of poets uh, the- who have brought in a number of poets who have brought in contributions. They were instrumental in bringing the idea or the represent Tibet to the outside world. Now, the second generation, who are basically the first generation exiles living outside the Tibetan setup. To take the first generation, I will the best person I will say that. Um, let me take a poem by one of the first generation writers. 1 minute. I took one and placed it here. Yeah. Yeah. I have a very interesting poem. I'll read a few interesting poems to you, and I'll speedily finish it up. You have first generation poem, most important
Hello, sir. It's not clear right now.
is it okay now? Abhijit?
Uh,
Hello,
s- sir, is it audible?
hello, hello. Can you hear me?
Okay.
Yeah, it's audible for me. Uh, so, Amdo Chedan Gedun Chofel had brought in a wonderful poem which is titled as the Milarepa's Reply. Milarepa is a very prominent thinker, and as Milarepa is there, they are trying to present Milarepa and the world outside. He is an enigmatic writer for the even for the modern theoretician. So he brought up a poem like this: "The earth and sky highs, and came they the storm fiends, the bleak and the cold. They who the storm winds in grim fingers hold. But Milarepa, the storm mountain's child, feared not their onslaught, so cruel and wild." See these lines. It's a very simple, very ordinary, very. I will say that it's a very ordinary mention by which you find a word which is just like a story. It tells us about the Tibetan experience. Then you have Chogyam Trungpa. Chogyam Trungpa was a very influential poet who was in America and who actually he was the one who influenced the beat generation poets. Allen Ginsberg Howl was inspired from him. He wrote a poem called Haiku. It's a Tibetan writing Japanese haiku, but it's not a haiku. It's a beat generation poem. The beginner in meditation resembles a haunting dog. More lines are there, but I'm not going to, in detail to see how it may not be having any meaning for us, but it has a greater meaning. It shows the hidden country. It represents the hidden country out for the multitudes like us. Then you have movement, a terrorist outfit in Tibet. And as the Tibetans knew the land much better than their Chinese counterparts, they were so successful in quelling a number of Tibetan. It is said that a handful of Tibetan horsemen could finish off entire regiments of Chinese army, just just making use of the natural echoing system of the mountains, because they were able to deceive them by going from one place to the other and to the other, because the Chinese, when they were camped in the foothills of the Himalayas, they thought that, hearing the noises, they thought that a large army is coming to attack them. In the night, what happened, that they fought against each other and they died off. And the Chinese authorities were shaken by it. They took it as a chance, and they wanted to stop it. So what they did was that they brought the case before the Dalai Lama, saying that you prophecy, or you say that it is all ahimsa, and then what are your persons doing? Actually, they were not doing. The Chinese were confused by it. But he said that he sent out a tape, and people started fighting, stopped the fighting, and they became a part of the system, and they became they started voicing their the Chinese had finished a number of Tibetan resistance fighters. Now, among them, you have Lasang Sering. Lasang Sering is a very passionate writer who brought up a poem called Waiting. The most important thing is that it's only 15 lines, but the 15 lines of the poem starts with the word waiting. Now think of the Tibetan side, which has been there for the last 30 or 60 odd years in exile. So waiting, 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 waiting. Another interesting poem that is by Lasang Sering is it's titled as The Bamboo Curtain Falling. Chinese communist movements have been called as Iron Curtain by the European side. Now, Iron Curtain, people used to call to say that no information will go out of it, so that's why it's called iron curtain. So this man said that it's only not an iron curtain, it's a bamboo curtain. It will fall down when the people will start fighting against it. And there's the third generation. Let me just very briefly say about the third generation, which I would say that Tenzin Sundu is the most prominent writer of this third generation. And if you can give the credit of who's the father of modern Tibetan poetry, it is none other than this man, Sundu, because he has produced wonderful works, he has produced wonderful ideas, and he was able to present a world that is much different from the rest. Now, let me read out a very small excerpt from one of his poems. You have heard Horizon. His poems, the maximum length that his poems runs will be 30 lines. Now, this poem is a excerpt from it. This poem tells us about that I'm a terrorist. Hmm? I am a terrorist, and the poem goes like this. It is a vigor of the resistance fighter. I am a bullet. I do not think. From the tin shell, I leap for the thrilling 2 second life and die with the dead. I am the life you left behind. See, I'm a bullet. I don't think, and I think only about the 2 second life that I had, and which I was able to live a more satisfactorily than many others. And then it is said that it's the life that I have left behind. It's not a new life. It's a life that I have left behind, because there is no past for me. Because once a bullet is fired, there is no past for me. Now let me conclude by saying, taking another poem of him, and the poem. Many of the Tibetan poems, or many of the Tibetan writers have written poems titled Untitled, because it's a very clear picture of the ambiguous situation of their nationhood that you can see when you are traveling with a Tibetan throughout India. They have to operate a thing called a yellow card. It's their registration card, which tells us that they are a kind of refugee and they don't belong to this place. Okay, so there's a I'll read a poem by another of the third generation poem, whose name is Gendun Chofel. Gendun Chofel has brought a poem which titled as Untitled. From Gendun Chofel actually lived in the late second generation, and died off in the early third generation. So Galen Toffel has brought a poem titled as Untitled. And to interesting to see that it's only what uh, it's only that basically uh, no. Many of the poets have written only one poem or two poems or the maximum 10 poems. The max number of poems have been written by Tenzin Sundu, and that accounts only to less than 30. So how is it? So these are very few vignettes of their resistance fights, but they are very powerful. They are moving, and they tell us about the plight of their life. Now this untitled poem in Gendon Choffel used his initials as his pseudonym, GC. GC tells us that there is no identity for the word GC. It gains identity when it is not GC, it becomes Gendon Choffel. The poem is like this. It is a doubt about existence. The title of the poem is Untitled. I'm just a soul in a fix crying for the right direction. My mind is so mixed, it's total confusion. The time is made of tenses, but moments are gone. When it's gone, I am the judge of the senses, but I always have moments to feel. It's neither me nor life. Moments are still pure, only neither can be concealed. Now it's a question that I have no soul. I have no way. I am nobody in present day life. So what can I do? What is going to happen? And this man is totally confused of the future also. This confusion, this confusion, this this confusion, this worry, this representation is actually the voice of the Tibetan. Now, in a poem by My Tibetanness by this man Tenzin, where he says that everybody will ask you that who are you, who are you, who are you? Are you a Chinese? Are you somebody else? But unfortunately, nobody will understand him as a Tibetan. And he has also given another poem which tells us that everybody says that you are not the ordinary Northeastern, you are not the Indian. And he says that I am not the Indian, I am another person with an R written on my forehead. And many persons, you know that many of us, when we were kids, we used to draw 100 times on our forehead like this because it was a childhood mystery that people, our co-scholars used to say that if you are able to draw 100 times like this, you are able to see heaven and things like that. Many of our parents used to say that it's only the culprits who used to do it like that because to escape from their anxiety, anguish, that they used to draw 100 times like that. But this man says that it is not any mark like that. Rogue. It's not the mark of the rogue. It's not the mark of the robber, but it's not the mark of the refugee. It's the mark of Rangzen or freedom that is placed on his forehead. Now, to conclude, what I will say is that it is basically poetry that is coming up as literature in Tibetan language and literature. But it's towards from 2010 onwards. You have poems, more than poems, short stories have come up. You have dramas have come up, and the purpose of all these are a kind of resistance, and all these are based on the four tenets, as I had earlier mentioned. They are basically based on religion, a reality of exile, desire to return, and the hope of return. Now I will finish my session by reading a small poem from His Holiness the Dalai Lama, which tells the same idea. Never give up. No matter what is going on, never give up. Develop the heart. Too much energy in your country is spent in developing the mind. Instead of the heart, develop the heart. Be compassionate, not just with your friends, but with everyone. Be compassionate. Work for peace in your heart and in the world. Work for peace, and I say again, never give up. No matter what is going on around you, never give up. So the poem is never give up. Construct not a mind, but a heart that is always open to question, open to suggestions, open for discussion, and most important, never give up. That is the message from Dalai Lama also, the supreme leader of the Tibetan community. And he uses the word compassionate. You may be confused that why is he using the term compassionate, because he is considered as the representation, or the human in the representation of the Avalokiteshvara, the most important deity of Tibet, the Buddha of compassion. Hmm? He Avalokiteshvara is a Buddha who is having 1,000 hands and 1,000 open hands to embrace any of the sinners, and by embracing these sinners, he is open to all kinds of possibilities. He is open to all kinds of understandings, and he says that it is never to give up, and never give up the struggle. Also, never give up developing a heart and not the mind. And when you are able to develop the heart, you are able to resist, you are able to coexist, and to note a final word, that the Dalai Lama has brought in a mission, or a mediation, which says that golden middle path, which tells that why don't the Tibetans and the Chinese coexist? Though many of us have not agreed to it, but it's still a valid point, that which is something that we have to also to discuss in detail. Never give up, never but develop a compassionate heart, but develop a soul whereby you can include everyone together. Thank you. Thank you for the session, and I think we can answer your doubts here. Abhijit, I think your mic is muted, can't hear anything.
Okay, sorry. Can you hear me now, sir?
uh,
Am I audible right now?
yes, please feel free to ask.
Okay. The platform is now open to questions, and I'd like to ask one question that has been bugging me since you said the idea of we that is seen in every nation. That is what the idea of how the idea of nationhood is constructed in the minds of people. Do you think, in the case of India, where the whole CAA controversy and the government being fascist and all these things like that, do resistance develop in
Can
an
you repeat
internal?
it?
Uh,
Your voice is breaking for me.
yeah. Can you hear me now, sir?
Can you type it out?
Yeah, sure, sir.
Yeah.
Uh,
Now it's clear.
okay. So what I was trying to ask you is that this particular form of resistance developed in Tibet because of an external invading agency, right?
Again, your voice is breaking. Can you type it
Okay.
out?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Now it's clear. I
Okay.
think this position is correct for you.
Okay. So I was wondering whether the idea of resistance will develop
Again,
without.
it's gone.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I think it's better to type it out. Uh, I have typed out the question, sir.
How does how does the idea of resistance develop a democracy like India, where the whole idea of nationhood is a problematic one? Yeah, there is that's a very tricky question, because India, you cannot say it as India developed. India has a unique we feeling. India has got its own differences, but its own joined together. What the countries that I have been discussing were having of one major ethnic group, but in the case of India, you cannot find a group like that. But yet, India is having a world of its own, because India, the most important thing about India is that India is inclusive of all the religions, all the cultures that have been coming here. Those who came in as refugees, those who have came in as conquerors, those who have came in as attackers, they are all part of the Indian psyche. So maybe this is the reason why the resistance is towards the ideas of them, but we are able to include them. Again, the secondly, to a great extent, Indian nationhood is problematic now. Earlier, it was not so problematic, I think. uh, Now, but think of the resistance that is coming in. Think of the cartoons or the trolls that are developing today. Maybe we are more to the trolls. Even Mahatma, during the days of Mahatma Gandhi and others, people were there criticizing them. There were writers like Hindi authors who were openly saying that why don't you there are because Gandhi and his followers never accepted certain things like homosexualities. So Ugra was a Hindi writer who brought in this topic of homosexuality, and he was able to question this homosexuality and present it before the readers, and by that he was able to change the whole setup. Nowadays we are more technologically advanced, and more we give more priority to the trolls. Maybe yesterday there was a troll which saying that we found the bishops the prime minister is in discussion with the poor farmers. It was the caption, but the figure that shown that there was a weighing machine which had the poor farmer on the one side and the bishop on the other side, and the prime minister is looking to the bishop's side. So the bishop's level, or when you the balance, it was tilted to that side. So but so then it is a video troll. Then there is a cross cut coming on the poor farmer, poor bishop. It was rewritten like that. Okay.
Okay. Um,
So I think my
my,
answer is correct.
why did poetry as a particular literary genre develop in Tibet? Or let me phrase it this way: why was poetry popular than other literary genres as a form of resistance?
Okay, one of the most important reason is that when you need not to be a literary personality to write poetry. Even when we are in our toilets, that we are able to write poems. We sing so much in our toilets, perhaps. And also for in the Tibetan case, many they never had a kind of essays or a kind of what storytelling practices. All they really had stories, but they were basically of the oral tradition. But on the other side, you have a number of persons coming in as priests there, and also the scriptures, the students, monks. Because in the Tibetan society, the monastery was the center of the society. It was the judge's house. It was the university. It was the granary. It was the jail and everything like that. So what they studied there was the Tibetan scriptures, and the scriptures were written because they only had printing in the early part of the 20th century and the late 19th century. So for a number of years, what they had to do is to write by hand, and Tibetan script is almost like Bengali script. So it takes a different time to use the calligraphy to write Tibetan scriptures. And also they used to recite these songs. You may be familiar with our these Brahmin settlements where they teach the students to recite the Vedas or the Upanishads. In the same manner, they started chanting and on and on. So maybe that is the reason. And also in the their religion is basically based on mantras. If you can search the internet, and I will show you one mantra. Let me show it before you. Have all seen this mantra on almost all the bikes and all the cars. This is basically the mantra of the Avalokiteshvara, which tells us that you have Om Namah Shivaya in Hindu ideology. In Tibetan ideology, it's not Om Namah Shivaya, it's Om Mani Padme Hum. If you recite it 108 times, it's the mantra of Avalokiteshvara or the Buddha of compassion. You say it, you recite it. Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum. So it's that rhythmic, mathematical chanting that is happening. And then you have seen that this prayer wheels in the hands of these persons. they are chanting this mantra and making it, moving it like that. There will be no gongs there. Instead, when you turn it, there will be, the mantra will be written how many thousand times inside of it. One time you say this and turn it like that, it will be covering 108 times of this mantra. So it is basically a religion, as well as the way that religion was passed on to the others in the shape of poetry, in the shape of chants, that they turned out to be using it. And that may be the reason that poetry became a very important task. And also poetry, to write poetry, you don't need any particular uh, training. Poetry, as I would love to use Wordsworthian definition, that it is a spontaneous overflow of powerful emotions. And many of the resistance writers have this spontaneous overflow. And take the case of India also, you have the Baul singers. It's the spontaneous overflow that they were able to sing out their soul to the God, or they were able to protest against the authorities of the government and others. Okay.
Okay, so do we have any more questions here? Okay, then I think it's time to wind up. So, first of all, I'd like to thank Appu sir for conducting this session on a very short notice. Thank you so much, sir. Next, I'd like to thank Dr. Matthew George, Principal, Maharaja's College, Dr. Jayamo, Vice Principal, Dr. Bindu Sharmila, Research Convener, without whose blessing this would not have been possible. I'm also taking this opportunity to thank Dr. Rekha Kareem, Head of the Department of English, and Dr. P.K. Srikumar for their wholehearted support. So we come to the end of the session, and I'd like to thank everyone for participating, and again thanking you, Appu sir, for your session. Thank you so much.